Hi, everybody. We're already deep into the new year. Well, a week into the new year, but the news is really just starting. And within a week, we're going to see how the U.S. election is going to be going because on the 15th of this month is the Iowa caucuses. And there's some other news heating up here. Let's get right to it. Here we have Musk in the most dangerous situation a person can be. Being open to using drugs, having fun with drugs, so to speak, and having all the money in the world. So that means there's no problem with supply. You could get as much as you want once you get hooked. And the stuff you get is top quality. So they've noticed, some people have noticed he seems to indulge, and that might worry his investors. This is probably this is among the most consequential stories that are happening right now. We have this situation of overseas wars, U.S. entanglement in these wars, U.S. involvement in these wars, as necessarily the U.S. has been acting as the world's policeman for quite some time now, whether you like it or not. The U.S. is protecting the airways, protecting the seaways of commerce around the world, got tons of bases, so many that probably there are bases with U.S. soldiers in your country today. So that's what the world is like. And here we have a situation where Israel talk of expanding war to Lebanon. Recently Israel killed one of the Hamas leaders who was there, and since the beginning of the Hamas incursion in Gaza, in southern Israel, we've had some bombardment, some little missiles that are coming down from the north, the south of Lebanon, obviously in an attempt to widen the war. Of course, behind this, it's not just about Middle East peace. Middle East peace there has always been scuttled by other countries that have other reasons, one way or another, to not have peace, to not want Israel to normalize relations with other countries in the regions. In this case, we have Iran, of which Hamas is supported and directed by. So we have this situation where Iran is not wanting Israel to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia, which was about to happen. Thus, the timing of the Hamas incursion into southern Israel effectively scuttled that. And of course, all these countries know that the U.S. is in a certain cycle where the American public are not amenable to more foreign wars, more expensive foreign wars that kill women and children. And so they're doing everything to widen the war and to further Iran is doing everything to further widen the war and sour public opinion in the United States towards supporting these wars, such as what's happening down there right above the Horn of Africa where Yemen is. And we have the Houthi rebels that have had some success in taking over that country, despite years and years of Saudi Arabia using their, I guess, probably expensive military, but really ineffective military to stop that. So the Houthis are shooting missiles into the sea lanes there, which, again, the U.S. and the U.K. Are the guarantors of access to that region. So they want to open up the war. And we have other places in the world. We have China seeming to making moves to not only really expand itself in the South China Sea, its zone of influence, but to finally take over Taiwan, which has always been on the cards, but now might be the perfect time with the U.S. perhaps overstretched in its financial considerations. You see, Congress has not been willing to give up more funds for these foreign wars. And of course, it all started with Russia invading the Ukraine in a place many Americans, I suppose, much like Vietnam, probably didn't hear, never heard of before this war started. And on top of that, and I've spoken about this before, I don't want to be too cynical about it, but we do have the U.S. media that largely, the biggest organ support one party over another. So during the George W. Bush era, he had two elective wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and they were disastrous. They ended up being disastrous. There might have been some reasons you could have made for going into those countries, but you can never tell what's going to happen, and they went wrong. And that administration, the Bush administration, was very inept at trying to explain what was really going on and why they were there. And finally, they kind of gave up. And many people, and even some Republicans, would have to admit that George W. Bush's first election was fishy at best. He probably shouldn't have been president. There were a lot of legal things that happened with that very close race that he got in. So the U.S. media spent a lot of time educating the public how these foreign wars that the U.S. is involved with or even paying for are terrible because we're killing innocent women and children, and George W. Bush is a war criminal and he should be dragged before the Hague. So imagine American surprise when President Obama, the president from the other party, came in, and he also had an elective war, perhaps even more elective than Afghanistan or Iraq. He just decided we're going to take over and overthrow Libya, and that became perhaps arguably at this point even a bigger disaster. Libya is a little more isolated geopolitically than Iraq. Certainly Iraq, there were bigger ramifications throughout the regions for that disaster. But Libya today is never not reported in the press because the press doesn't want to scream that Obama killed women and children and needs to be dragged before the Hague like George W. Bush. So what we have is some things never change. So this is all of that. It's not to throw sour grapes one way or another, but just to say why the U.S. public, a certain amount of it might be opposed at this point to the foreign wars. People on both sides of the equation have heard a lot of stuff from the media about it. So what we're going into in this year, excuse me, I'm spending a little more time on this because this is a setup for 2024. Something that we should watch is that all of these other countries see the U.S. unease with greater involvement. So, if you really want to predict things, before. Sorry, I should have turned on my mute there. So, hold on. So before got it. Lost my thought. Now I'm back. See, okay. Before World War I, before World War II, Alexa, stop. It seems my laundry is done. So before World War I and before World War II, even before the Gulf War, before revolutions, even the experts on these countries, on the regions, usually don't have a good idea about what's going to happen. They didn't predict those wars. And it's only afterwards that we look back with 2020 hindsight and we say, oh yeah, it was obvious. This happened and this happened. And these were the reasons. So some people, I'm not the only one, I'm just coming up with this, are positing that we're looking at a situation where we might be at a higher level of worldwide conflict than we have been in quite a long time, because a lot of countries are seeing the U.S. Unease with getting involved. So I just wanted to bring up some things that if you're an analyst and you're boldly making your predictions, you might posit something like, knowing the U.S. public unease and the unwillingness to give more money to Ukraine that most Americans haven't heard of, and the desperation of Russia at some juncture, maybe events might conspire that a small tactical nuke might be used in Ukraine. That's something that seems impossible. All these things seem impossible until they happen. But if it were to happen, it would happen in this sort of circumstance. Now, the U.S. has all along had a plan, public and some secret. It's kind of like called a soft, hard war, where if that would happen, you wouldn't want to escalate it, but you would start to try to blockade Russia where you could, start, sinking their ships worldwide, daring them to use more nukes. Of course, the U.S. has a secret countermeasures for such things, but we won't talk any more about that. However, right now, the U.S. public opinion is against more war. So Russia might think, if they were forced to do it, this might be the time to do it. This the same sort of situation that if China could make some move against Taiwan, could do something just to force maybe political concessions from Taiwan, not actually fight it out. Of course, the real situation in China is completely isolated. It's not like they're an expansionist. They're just dipping their toe outside the water, trying to step out. They're already completely hemmed in. Their resources, water, power, are imported and very minimal. So they're in a tenuous situation. But it might be a good time for them to make their move, because the U.S., there might not be the public opinion that's there for a long, drawn-out blockade in the South China Seas and huge deployments and lots of money going into that. On top of that, election campaign year. So the current administration, Biden, would not want to get entangled. This is another, they would want to stay free of more escalation of foreign wars bubbling up. So they'd be very careful this year to make sure that anything that happens is negotiated and tamped down and doesn't require another $100 billion here and there and deployments. So we also have the other guy who looks like he's going to be the candidate one way or another, Trump, who is taking, sort of the rabble-rousing public opinion that we should oppose these expensive foreign wars, either directly with them or paying for them. And other Republicans who have spent many decades, accepting that the U.S. should stand up against crazy foreign dictators, they're kind of cynically changed their point as an election tactic to combine themselves with the public opinion to say that we shouldn't be involved in these wars. Of course, the public, even the right, have been educated by the liberal media, who spent so much time telling us how foreign wars and our involvement in them is bad. So you see, it's kind of a perfect storm. What else did I have to say about this? Now, okay, here's the other point that always would come up. So when foreigners look at the U.S. Political parties, they say, it's so funny there's so much rhetoric because there's no difference between the political parties. We could see that again between the Bush administration, the Obama administration, kind of same economic policies, same group of advisors behind the scenes from the same big Wall Street banks, the same opening up of big foreign wars, despite all the media rhetoric against them in both of those administrations. Now, however, Trump, some people say Trump is different, and I would say he's chaotic, and I'm not sure he's demonstrated he's different, and his chaotic and self-inflicted wounds seem to speak to me that his ability to really change things is probably less than a conventional politician. Others would disagree with that. So, but there's this talk coming up to the second term in the media about Trump being dictatorial, of him dismantling the systemic bureaucratic organizations behind the scenes that tried to halt all the things that he was doing, the so-called barriers to change. So some voters would see that this is a once-in-a-generation chance to get Trump in there and make real change. I think you really have to, on balance, be skeptical if that's possible. But all of this, again, knits itself together so other countries out there, China and Russia, Iran, players in the Middle East, we see in Venezuela wanting to take over, country's got some oil next to it, let's take that over. Once in a generation chance for countries to make their move. So the bottom line here is that this year is going to be one to watch. So let's get back to the news. And when we look at the context, all of this sounds very grave, but I try to be, I don't want to look like I'm some button-down analyst with a briefcase. I used to be, I'm not anymore, but I want to allow us, when we have this context, it gives us a little distance from the news, that we can look at it and watch it and not feel panicked by it. Pardon me, I need a drink. Golden Globe, something about that. Who cares? Stuff about the election. If you've never been here, I was stuck here for 2 days because the flight got canceled, and the Kansai Airport in Japan by Osaka. It's a very weird, sterile place. It was back then. They're just a small little hotel and entertainment area there. Then they didn't have the land, so they just said, well, the ocean is just land that's underwater, so let's raise it up. So it's a weird, odd, sterile place, and it's so interesting because there's nothing of interest there. And this is just an article about how, just like they thought it would, it's sinking back into the sea from whence it came. This is this movie people talk. It's a few weeks ago, I think it came out. This movie produced by the Obamas of all people called Leave the World Behind, about what happens when the internet is gone. It does seem very strange, so much we've become a society where I can't even look at a web page now to do banking. Now it has to be an app on your phone. You got to own this phone. Everything's through a mobile device. We've become very, very dependent on one backbone of infrastructure. I always look at these sort of articles. Elusive alligator-like creature found in the treetops of Mexico. It's a new species. What does it look like? Oh, it just looks like a lizard. Every one you've ever seen in your life. But they always write these headlines to make it seem like it's going to be some exotic alien creature, but it never is. Still interesting that there's stuff all around us that we haven't discovered or haven't delineated in our science yet. This is this fascinating thing where the American Defense Secretary, which in a previous age would have been called the Secretary of War, now it's the Secretary of Defense. So we don't make war, we only defend ourselves. he was secretly hospitalized. And this is not, I don't think this is supposed to happen even without public knowledge, but apparently the president himself did not know this. And I guess this underscores the idea that if you were alive before the end of the Cold War, you know, the mental faculties of the president and all those people that surrounded him were always very debated. They were very important because, you know, we were in an era of mutual assured destruction. Everybody had their nukes pointed at each other, and that's what kept the peace, so to speak. But if someone launched to you, you would have to make the decision within a few minutes to launch back, or else your own civilization would be destroyed. So that meant the mental faculties of the president and all the people surrounding him were important. But after the Cold War, I think that kind of fell away some. But now, as you see what we talked about before with all this stuff going on in the world with wars, now perhaps these concepts of the fitness and the availability of top people to make decisions, it's become very important again. What else do we have? Epstein. I've heard plenty about that, I think. More about Israel. It's hard to go on from when you start out about the wars and the rumors of wars and possible nukes to come back from that. But I think there's a few things in here. Taylor Swift, for some reason. Stuff going back to the moon, more stuff about UFOs, and I think this is the last thing. And I always just mention something about vitamins. You know, all Americans are crazy about vitamins. We take vitamins, and then you might meet some Brit, and the Brit will say, "What? Don't you know those things don't work?" And the Americans are like, "What? No, everybody takes them. They're supposed to." See, when you go in the UK, there's a big warning label on vitamins. It say there's no evidence that this does anything for you at all. It's not exactly what it says, but something like that. So everybody there knows it, and the vitamins are just like a very small section in the store because it's a kind of discredited thing. But in America, there's aisles and aisles, and they're advertised on TV, and so here Americans are finding out, finally, after the rest of the world, that multivitamins don't really seem to do anything for you. So I think that's all for the news today. Like I say, this is the first week, into the first week. This is the 7th of January of the year. News is ramping up again. 1 week from now, we're going to see if Trump is Trump going to win Iowa. You know, a few weeks ago we had the news media that's kind of maybe working with some of the Republicans who would like to replace Trump with somebody who's a better candidate, floating that Nikki Haley was close to Trump in the numbers. And a month before that, we had the governor of Iowa endorsing DeSantis, anything to see if they could float another candidate. But right now it looks like Trump's right in the catbird seat. This is our Art of War card we look at every day. See if we can get some wisdom. Wait a second. We can get some wisdom from a Chinese guy over a millennia ago. And today's card says, burden your adversary with victory. The strategy is allow the consequences of attaining his objective to hinder your adversary. The basis of this is an adversary that is hindered by a burdensome victory leaves other challenges unmet. That's interesting. So when we always think about how do we apply this to our own lives or our business, you know, sometimes if we win or we get what we want, maybe it's a little more than we bargained for, and it's hard to manage and take care of. So this would be a situation where you yourself or somebody else finally gets what they battle for, and then they are burdened with maintaining it and taking care of it, which uses up their resources, either physical resources or mental resources. So that's the news for today. This year is going to be a big year, I'm pretty sure, in the news. So stay tuned, and I'm come back every day where there's enough news. Usually about every day. I'll see you. Bye bye.